Resident Evil 6 is usually looked at as the black sheep of the series, and even though I do think the game's underrated, I could definitely see why the game has such a bad reputation. I mean, I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable with it babysitting my kids or anything like that. However, if you ask my snack pack obsessed candy ass, I think it's insane that the true weak link of the series, Resident Evil 5, gets a pass when it's even further away from the series' roots. And with the Resident Evil triple pack being on the Nintendo Switch, I thought now was as good a time as any to reopen the case and finally bring justice to RE5. So pour yourself a glass of crab juice, send a snack pack or two to the address on the screen, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, Cameron all one word, to tell you why Resident Evil 6 is easily better than 5. Okay, so after the Resident Evil 1 remake and 0, people were starting to get a little tired of the franchise. The feeling was that the games were becoming too formulaic, stale, and in a meeting featuring literally every human being in the world, it was decided that the tank controls absolutely had to go. So then after going through 147 different scrapped versions, Resident Evil 4 was finally released as a horror-themed third-person action shooter, and it was a big hit. Fans everywhere loved the series' new direction, so naturally, Capcom followed it up with a sequel made in the same style, Resident Evil 5. And wouldn't you know it, the game was an even bigger hit as far as sales go, with the critical reception not being too bad either. But personally, as a huge fan of the series, I was a bit disappointed at the time. Even though it was still a lot of fun in its own right, I felt like it focused way too much on action to the point where it wasn't even a Resident Evil game anymore. There's always been assloads of fun shooters to choose from, and even though Resident Evil's been known to provide some pretty decent action in its own right, the main draw of the series to me has always been the horror. There's just something special about playing a Resident Evil game at 2 in the morning and then trying to go to sleep right after. I held off on playing Resident Evil 4 right away because I had just finished the remake of the first game at the time, and, well, it scared my high school self so much that I didn't think I was ready for a new game so soon. What can I say, I get really into these games when I play them, so don't judge me, you dingus. When I finally did get around to playing 4, though, I was a bit disappointed that the only thing that kinda scared me were the chainsaw guys and Chief Mendez. Despite that, though, I was able to overlook being disappointed at the absence of true fear and tension, because the game was just too fun to deny, and it was creepy enough to the point where it wasn't too much of a departure. I mean, even without zombies, it still felt like a horror game thanks to the parasite-infected villagers being so weird. Plus, Leon and Ada are always cool. Resident Evil 5, however, didn't even try to be scary at any point, and it decided it was just gonna straight up be an action game. The villagers were still creepy and everything, but it just felt like they used guns way more often than they did before. Besides, it's kinda hard to feel tension when you have a partner with you the whole time. Playing with another person was fun, and it is possible for there to be horror even if you're not alone. But it was pretty clear that this game was just trying to be like all the other popular games at the time, which made the series lose its identity to me. And to make matters worse, they swapped Leon out as the protagonist for the generic cookie-cutter hero Chris. Don't get me wrong, Chris was fine in the first game, but I think they kinda ruined him in Resident Evil 5. I mean, look at those muscles and try to tell me he's not on something. Rather than Leon making wisecracks and being a subtle badass the whole game, RE5's got Chris being ultra serious, boring, and just coming off as a guy you wouldn't want to be around outside of these situations. I think Leon comes off as one of the buds, whereas Chris comes off as a dad who'd make his kids tuck their shirts in, call them sir, and then have them in bed by 7. Despite all my gripes with Resident Evil 5, though, the bottom line was that the game still sold out the ass, got great reviews, and fans at the time played the hell out of it. So if you ask me, I have no idea why anybody got mad at Capcom for keeping the same style going in the 6th game. Because after all the success of the 5th game, what else were they supposed to think fans wanted? I mean, to this day, it's still the highest selling Resident Evil game of all time. Sure, there still were a lot of people talking about how they missed zombies and horror before the next game came out, but it's not like Capcom didn't listen to the fans at all or anything. I mean, Resident Evil 6 was definitely still an action game, but at least it took a step back in the right direction of survival horror by bringing zombies back. The game didn't have anything as emotionally taxing as being chased down by a surprise attack from a Crimson Head or anything like that, but there were still parts that made me uneasy, like whenever he had to deal with the Hoobastank monster or whatever. Yeah, Chris's boring ass is back at it again with a partner who's somehow an even bigger tool. But the beauty of Resident Evil 6 is that there's 3 different 2-player campaigns and a 4th where you could play as Ada, which I think is extremely ambitious for a game to do. So even though I'm not a fan of 2-player core Resident Evil games, I still think this is a huge improvement over 5 if you're gonna do it. Every campaign obviously has its own separate story, but I think it's pretty clever the way they all overlapped with each other. But the main difference between the campaigns is that they all offer their own unique playstyles as well, with Leon's focusing mainly on zombies and monsters, Chris's campaign completely focusing on parasitic humans with guns, and Sherry's campaign being a combination of both. Speaking of Sherry, though, I think it's pretty cool that they brought her back into the series here along with Wesker's son to clean their parents' messes up. The length of each campaign's about 8 hours long, which I think is long enough to where if you hate a horror game opening up with this, then you can still have fun with the other 2 stories. Not to mention that Ada's bonus campaign's pretty beefy in its own right. And as if that wasn't a big enough improvement over Resident Evil 5, you could also join other people's games as a monster and try to kill the player. I mean, what more could you ask for? Well, survival horror, yeah, but at least this game offers a little bit of that, whereas 5 doesn't offer any at all. And in addition to that little bit of survival horror, I don't think anybody could deny that Resident Evil 6 is pretty goddamn epic. You might still hate the game, and that's completely fine, but you can't look me in the ass and tell me that this isn't an epic game. It's definitely not perfect by any means, and it's still not what I want out of Resident Evil, but if you hate 6, then logically you need to hate 5 too. But for reasons I'll never understand, 6 is the game that gets all the heat for ruining the series. I mean, even Leon's campaign's still very much an action game rather than survival horror, but at least there are zombies, and the aforementioned Hoobastank monster does add tension whenever he shows up. So if nothing else, Resident Evil 6 deserves a little credit for taking the series a step in the right direction. Unfortunately though, Resident Evil 6 was framed for a crime that 5 committed, and it never even had a right to a fair trial. Resident Evil 4 walked the fine line at completely being an action game, but the original series was undergoing a scandal at the time, so the jury went easy on it because of how likable it was. And since the 4th game already set the precedent that an action-focused Resident Evil was acceptable, the 5th game decided to be a dick and completely throw horror out the window. Unfortunately though, nobody noticed until the statute of limitations ran out, so right now, Resident Evil 5's relaxing in a mansion as the best-selling game in the series. Meanwhile, the public kept a close eye on what 6 was gonna do, so it didn't matter that the game took a step in the right direction and committed crimes far less heinous than 5. The game was destined to have an example made out of it to send Capcom the message that enough time had passed to where fans wanted Resident Evil to be scary again. Don't get me wrong, my client Resident Evil 6 is still guilty of not being a true survival horror game, and it definitely deserved to be locked up. I just think it's kinda sad that Resident Evil 5 did way worse and was able to get away scot-free, and to this day, only a small handful of people are even aware of the atrocities that game committed. Like I said, it's still pretty fun, but Resident Evil 6 did everything 5 did even better if that's the kind of game you're in the mood for, while still being an ass hair closer to the series' roots. But anyway, what do you think though? Should Resident Evil 5 be put on trial, or should we just enjoy the game for what it is now that the series returned to its roots? Also, what do you think about Resident Evil 6? Do you think it's better than 5, or did I just give it way too much credit? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody. But let me tell you, if there's two people who'd never become action games if they were originally survival horror, today's patrons of the day, Michael D and T. Joss Dinks. If you want to be badasses like these two, then consider supporting FU Game Crew on Patreon for loot boxes in the mail and other wacky rewards. And if you want to make a cameo, then send pictures or videos of you rocking any FU Game Crew merch like these legendary human beings you see before you. As always, like and share this video anywhere on the internet to help this channel grow. And if you want to prove that you're not down with registered sex offenders, then go ahead and press the subscribe button if you haven't already. My name's Cameron, all one word, and I'll be back with more videos soon.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.